My best friend disappeared 8 years ago. He just showed up at my door and told me why he had to run. The doorbell rang at 11:34 p.m. on a Friday night, which was already strange because nobody just drops by my apartment unannounced at that hour. I was on my couch in sweatpants watching a documentary about deep-sea creatures, halfway through a bowl of microwave popcorn, when the sound cut through the narration about bioluminescent jellyfish. I paused the TV and sat there for a second, wondering if I'd imagined it. Then it rang again, longer this time, insistent. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole, and what I saw made my entire body go cold. Standing in the fluorescent hallway light was a man I hadn't seen in 8 years, a man I'd assumed was dead despite never finding a body, a man whose disappearance had derailed my entire senior year of college and left a wound that never fully healed. My best friend since 5th grade, the person who knew me better than anyone, was standing at my door looking thinner and older and somehow desperate. I yanked the door open so fast I nearly pulled it off the hinges. "Jordan?" I said, and my voice came out strangled. Jordan Reeves looked at me with eyes that had seen things I couldn't imagine and said 5 words that would shatter everything I thought I knew about his disappearance. "I'm sorry. They were going to kill me." I had been living a relatively normal life as a software engineer in Seattle for the past 3 years when Jordan appeared at my door like a ghost made flesh. After he vanished during our senior year at State University, I'd spent months consumed by the mystery, helping his parents search, talking to police, organizing volunteer search parties that combed through forests and ravines looking for any sign of him. Jordan had been my best friend since we were both 11 years old, when we'd bonded over a shared obsession with building elaborate Lego cities and a mutual hatred of gym class. We'd gone through middle school together, survived high school, and ended up at the same university because neither of us could imagine not having the other around. He was the kind of friend who knew my coffee order, who could finish my sentences, who had talked me through my worst breakups and celebrated my best achievements. When he disappeared without a trace in March of our senior year, leaving behind his car, his wallet, his phone, and absolutely no explanation, it destroyed something fundamental in how I understood the world. People didn't just vanish. Not people like Jordan, who was responsible and cautious and always texted back within minutes. The official investigation had gone nowhere. Detective Lawrence Huang, who'd been with the Missing Persons Unit for 14 years, had interviewed everyone Jordan knew, reviewed security footage from campus, traced his last known movements, and found nothing that explained where he'd gone or why. Jordan's last confirmed sighting was leaving the university library at 9:15 p.m. on a Wednesday night. His roommate said he never came home. His car was found in the library parking lot the next morning, locked, with his backpack still in the back seat containing his laptop, textbooks, and the sandwich he'd packed for a late-night study session. His phone records showed no calls or texts after 8:43 p.m., when he'd texted me saying he'd be studying late and would see me tomorrow. There was no evidence of foul play, no witnesses, no leads. It was as if Jordan had simply ceased to exist between the library doors and his car. The case went cold after 6 months. Jordan's parents, Linda and Thomas Reeves, never stopped searching, never stopped hoping, but the rest of the world moved on. I graduated without my best friend, got a job, moved to Seattle, built a life. But I never stopped wondering what happened that night. Now Jordan was standing in my apartment, and I was trying to process that the person I'd mourned for 8 years was alive and drinking water from one of my glasses with shaking hands. He looked different. He'd always been lean, but now he was thin in a way that suggested missed meals and chronic stress. His dark hair, which he'd kept short in college, was longer and shot through with premature gray at the temples. He had a scar above his left eyebrow that hadn't been there before, and his eyes had a haunted quality that made him look decades older than his 29 years. He was wearing jeans and a plain black hoodie, and he kept glancing at my window like he expected someone to be watching from outside. I sat across from him at my kitchen table and tried to figure out where to even begin. "You said someone was going to kill you," I finally said. "Who? Why? And why the hell didn't you tell anyone you were alive for 8 years?" Jordan set down the water glass and looked at me with an expression that was equal parts guilt and fear. "Because telling anyone would have gotten them killed too," he said quietly. "The people who were after me, they had resources and connections I couldn't fight. Disappearing was the only way to protect everyone I loved. That included you." I felt anger flash hot through my chest. "You let us think you were dead," I said. "Your parents, Jordan. Your mom had a breakdown. Your dad quit his job to search for you full-time. I watched them destroy themselves trying to find you." Jordan's face crumpled, and I could see genuine anguish there. "I know," he said, his voice breaking. "I know what I did to them. I think about it every single day. But if I'd stayed, if I'd told anyone what I'd discovered, they would have killed me, and then they would have killed anyone I'd told. I had to choose between breaking their hearts and getting them murdered. I chose the option where they stayed alive." "What did you discover?" I demanded. "What could possibly be worth this?" Jordan took a deep breath. "You remember Professor Whitmore?" My hands went still. Of course I remembered Professor Richard Whitmore. He'd been Jordan's academic advisor, a respected economics professor who'd taught at the university for 23 years. He'd won teaching awards, published extensively, and was beloved by students and faculty alike. He'd retired 2 years after Jordan disappeared and now lived somewhere in Florida, enjoying his pension and presumably his grandchildren. What about him? I asked carefully. Jordan pulled a flash drive from his pocket and set it on the table between us. 3 months before I disappeared, I was working as Professor Whitmore's research assistant, he said. I was helping him compile data for a paper on investment patterns in emerging markets. I had access to his university computer and his files. One night I was looking for a specific dataset, and I accidentally opened the wrong folder. What I found was evidence that Professor Whitmore was running an elaborate investment fraud scheme that had stolen approximately $8.3 million from investors over 15 years. My stomach dropped. That's impossible, I said. Professor Whitmore was one of the most respected people at the university. He gave lectures on ethics. Jordan's laugh was bitter. That's what made it work, he said. He used his reputation and his position to gain trust. He'd approach wealthy individuals, usually retirees or people who'd come into inheritances, and pitch them on exclusive investment opportunities. He'd show them fabricated returns, fake documentation, manufactured success stories. He'd convince dozens of people to give him their money, promising returns of 15 to 20% annually. But there were no actual investments. It was a Ponzi scheme. He was using new investor money to pay returns to old investors while pocketing the majority of the funds himself. The university salary was just his cover story. His real income was millions of dollars stolen from people who trusted him. I was trying to wrap my mind around this. You found evidence of this on his computer? Jordan nodded. Spreadsheets tracking every investor, every payment, every fabricated return. Bank account information for offshore accounts where he was hiding the money. Communications with co-conspirators who were helping him recruit new investors and create fake documentation. It was all there, meticulously documented, and I stumbled across it completely by accident. What did you do? I asked, though I was starting to dread the answer. Jordan's face darkened. I panicked, he said. I should have gone to the police immediately, but I was 21 years old and terrified. I copied the files onto this flash drive, and then I made the worst mistake of my life. I told Professor Whitmore what I'd found. I confronted him in his office the next day. I actually thought, that maybe there was an explanation. Maybe it was data for a research project on fraud. Maybe it was fabricated for academic purposes. I wanted to believe there was a reasonable explanation because I respected him. I told him I'd seen the files, and I needed him to explain what they were. My hands had gone cold. What did he say? Jordan's voice went flat, like he was reciting something he'd memorized. He closed his office door, he said. He sat down across from me, and he didn't deny anything. He told me I was a smart kid, and he'd always liked me, which was why he was going to give me 2 choices. Option 1, I could accept $50,000 in cash, sign a non-disclosure agreement, and never mention what I'd found to anyone. He'd frame it as hush money for keeping quiet about confidential research. Option 2, I could refuse, and he would destroy my academic career by planting evidence that I'd been plagiarizing my work and fabricating research data. He said he had the connections and credibility to make sure I'd never work in academia or any respectable field. He gave me 24 hours to decide. I stared at Jordan. You didn't take either option. He shook his head. I took the flash drive and I ran, he said. I knew those weren't really my only options. Option 3, the one he didn't say out loud, was that if I went to the police or tried to expose him, he'd have me killed. I know that sounds paranoid, but you have to understand who Professor Whitmore was connected to. Some of his investors were powerful people. Politicians, business executives, people with resources and reach. If I exposed the fraud, I'd be destroying them too, revealing how they'd been scammed. They'd want me silenced. And Whitmore had made it clear he had the ability to make problems disappear. The scar above his eyebrow, he touched it unconsciously. This is from the night I left. Someone tried to grab me in the library parking lot. I fought them off and ran. I didn't go back to my dorm. I didn't go home. I just ran. The story was insane, but looking at Jordan's face, at the fear still present in his eyes 8 years later, I believed him. Where did you go? I asked. Everywhere, he said. I hitchhiked out of state that night. I'd pulled all the cash I had from ATMs before anyone could track me, about $1,200. I bought a bus ticket to Denver using a fake name, then another bus to Phoenix. I worked under the table, cash jobs that didn't require ID or background checks. Construction, restaurant kitchens, warehouse work. I moved every few months, never staying anywhere long enough for someone to find me. I grew my hair out, lost weight, changed everything about my appearance. I checked news from home obsessively, waiting to see if Professor Whitmore's scheme had been exposed if someone else had discovered it. But nothing ever came out. He just kept teaching, kept stealing, kept living his respectable life. Why come back now? I asked. After 8 years, why show up at my door? Jordan pulled out his phone and showed me a news article dated 3 days ago. Professor Richard Whitmore, beloved former economics professor at State University, had died of a heart attack at age 68 while on vacation in Naples, Florida. He was being remembered as a pillar of the academic community and a devoted family man. Services would be held the following week. He's dead, Jordan said. For the first time in 8 years, I can stop running. But I need your help. That flash drive has all the evidence of his fraud, and now that he's gone, the victims deserve to know what happened to their money. His estate is probably worth millions, money that was stolen. The investors need to be able to file claims to get some kind of restitution. But I can't just show up after 8 years and expect people to believe me. I need someone they trust to help me bring this forward. I need you. I looked at the flash drive sitting on my table, this tiny piece of technology that had destroyed my best friend's life and was now asking me to risk my own. You want me to help you expose a dead professor's fraud scheme? I said slowly. Using evidence you stole 8 years ago while on the run from people who wanted to kill you. Do you understand how this sounds? I know, Jordan said. I know it sounds insane, but it's the truth. And I have proof. The flash drive has everything. Bank statements, investor lists, communications. It's all there. We just need to get it to the right people. Who? I asked. Who are the right people for this? Jordan had clearly been thinking about this. We need to go to the FBI, he said. Specifically, their white-collar crime division. Investment fraud of this magnitude crosses state lines and involves amounts that make it federal jurisdiction. And we need a financial forensic expert to verify the evidence, to show that it's authentic and hasn't been tampered with. We need to build an airtight case before we go public so nobody can dismiss it as conspiracy theory or fabrication. I spent the next hour asking Jordan questions while my mind raced through the implications of what he was asking. He stayed in my apartment that night, sleeping on my couch because he had nowhere else to go, and because I wasn't sure I believed he was safe even with Professor Whitmore dead. The next morning, I called in sick to work and started making phone calls. I contacted an old journalism professor from college, Dr. Angela Sterling, who'd taught investigative reporting and had connections in the media world. I explained that I had a source with information about a major financial fraud case and needed guidance on how to proceed. Dr. Sterling, who'd been teaching for 26 years and had broken several significant stories before moving to academia, was immediately interested. She connected me with a financial forensic analyst named Marcus Okoye, who'd spent 15 years examining complex fraud cases for both law enforcement and private firms. Marcus agreed to meet with us that afternoon to examine the evidence on Jordan's flash drive. We met at a coffee shop downtown at 2:30 p.m., a neutral public location where Jordan felt safer than in some office building. Marcus was in his mid-40s, professional and direct. He listened to Jordan's story without interrupting, taking notes on a legal pad. When Jordan finished, Marcus asked for the flash drive. "Can I see what we're working with?" Jordan handed it over, and Marcus pulled out his laptop. He spent 30 minutes reviewing the files while Jordan and I sat in tense silence. Finally, Marcus looked up, and his expression was grim. "This is real," he said. "I've seen a lot of fraud documentation in my career, and this is consistent with a sophisticated Ponzi scheme. The spreadsheets track investor deposits, fabricated returns, actual withdrawals. The offshore account information matches patterns I've seen in money laundering cases. The communications show coordination with at least 3 other individuals who were helping recruit investors and create false documentation. If this is authentic, and I have no reason to believe it isn't based on the metadata and file structures, this represents a minimum of $8 million in fraud over approximately 15 years. How do we prove it's authentic? I asked. That it hasn't been fabricated or manipulated? Marcus closed the laptop. We'd need to subpoena the actual bank records to verify the offshore accounts, he said. We'd need to interview the investors listed in these files to confirm they gave money to Professor Whitmore. We'd need to examine his financial records, his estate, his tax returns. That's going to require law enforcement involvement. This isn't something we can investigate privately, which brings us back to the FBI. Dr. Sterling made a call to a contact she had at the Seattle field office, a special agent named Diana Kovacs, who specialized in financial crimes and had been with the Bureau for 12 years. Agent Kovacs agreed to meet with us the following day at the federal building. I spent that night helping Jordan prepare his statement, going over the timeline of what happened 8 years ago and what evidence existed on the flash drive. Jordan was terrified. He kept saying that once we involved the FBI, there was no going back. If any of Whitmore's co-conspirators were still active, if any of the investors had been complicit rather than victims, going public would put a target on our backs. I tried to reassure him that Whitmore was dead, that the threat was gone, but Jordan had spent 8 years running, and paranoia was deeply ingrained. The meeting with Agent Kovacs was scheduled for 10 a.m. Monday morning. We arrived early and went through security, then were escorted to a conference room where Agent Kovacs was waiting with another agent she introduced as Special Agent Robert Chen from the Financial Crimes Unit. Jordan and I sat across from them, and for the first time in 8 years, my best friend told his story to law enforcement. Agent Kovacs recorded the interview while Agent Chen took notes. Jordan explained how he'd been Professor Whitmore's research assistant, how he'd accidentally discovered the fraud evidence, how Whitmore had threatened him, how someone had attacked him in the parking lot the night he ran. He described 8 years of living off the grid, moving constantly, working under fake names, afraid to contact anyone from his old life. When he finished, Agent Kovacs asked the critical question, "Do you still have the evidence?" Jordan handed over the flash drive. Agent Chen immediately took it to their technical team for analysis, while Agent Kovacs continued the interview. She asked detailed questions about Professor Whitmore's co-conspirators, about the investors Jordan remembered from the files, about the offshore accounts. She asked why Jordan had waited until now to come forward. Jordan explained about Whitmore's death, about feeling like the immediate threat was finally gone, about wanting the victims to have a chance at restitution. Agent Kovach's expression was neutral and professional, but I could see her wheels turning. "This is a significant allegation," she said carefully. "Professor Whitmore was a respected academic who's now deceased and can't defend himself. The evidence is 8 years old and obtained without authorization. Even if everything you're saying is true, building a prosecutable case is going to be extremely difficult." "We're not looking to prosecute a dead man," I said. "We're looking to help his victims recover their money." Agent Chen returned with a preliminary analysis. The files on the flash drive appeared to be authentic, created over a period from 15 years ago until 8 years ago when Jordan copied them. The metadata was consistent with the timeline Jordan had described. The offshore account information referenced banks in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. The investor list contained 38 names, most of whom appeared to be individuals rather than institutions. "This is enough to open an investigation," Agent Chen said. "We'll need to verify the bank accounts, contact the investors, and examine Professor Whitmore's estate. That's going to take time, potentially months. We'll also need to address the fact that Mr. Reeves has been living under assumed identities for 8 years, which raises its own legal issues." Jordan went pale. "Am I going to be charged with something?" Agent Kovach exchanged a look with her partner. "That's going to depend on several factors," she said. "You weren't using false identities to commit crimes or evade legitimate legal obligations. You were fleeing what you believed was a credible threat to your life. However, you did steal confidential files from a university computer, and you've been working illegally without proper documentation. Those are technically crimes, though given the circumstances, prosecution seems unlikely. The bigger issue is establishing your legal identity again after 8 years. You've been declared legally dead." That statement hung in the air. Jordan had been declared dead 3 years after his disappearance, after the mandatory waiting period and a court ruling based on the presumption that he died given the total lack of evidence he was alive. His parents had held a memorial service. There had been a death certificate. In the eyes of the law, Jordan Reeves didn't exist anymore. "That's going to be complicated to reverse," Agent Kovach said. "You'll need to file a petition with the court to have the death declaration reversed. You'll need to prove your identity, explain where you've been, and work with Social Security to restore your legal status. None of that is going to be quick or easy. In the meantime, I'd recommend you contact your family and let them know you're alive before this becomes public." Jordan looked like he might be sick. "I can't," he said. "If I contact them before we expose the fraud, if word gets out that I'm alive before we secure the evidence and protect the investigation, Whitmore's co-conspirators might try to destroy records or silence witnesses. We need to move fast. How fast can you verify the evidence and secure the assets?" Agent Chen shook his head. "This isn't television," he said. "We're talking about international bank accounts, offshore holdings, estate law, interviews with potentially dozens of people. Even rushing, we're looking at weeks minimum before we have enough to move on anything. And that's assuming everything checks out and we can verify the fraud actually occurred." Jordan stood up abruptly. "Weeks? We don't have weeks. If anyone in Whitmore's network realizes I'm alive and talking to the FBI, they'll disappear anything that can tie them to the fraud. We need to freeze the assets now. We need to contact the investors now. We need to move before they do." Agent Kovach's voice was firm. "Mr. Reeves, I understand your urgency, but we have to follow procedure. We can't freeze assets without evidence. We can't contact investors without confirming the fraud. We can't move forward based solely on your testimony and a flash drive that may or may not be admissible in court given how it was obtained. We need to do this right, or the whole case falls apart. Sit down and let us do our jobs." Jordan sat back down, but I could see he was struggling. 8 years of running had left him with a deep distrust of systems and processes. He'd survived by being proactive, by moving faster than the threats chasing him. Now he was being asked to sit still and wait while federal bureaucracy slowly ground forward. I put my hand on his shoulder. "We'll figure this out," I said. "We've made it this far." The investigation moved slowly, exactly as Agent Chen had warned. Over the next 3 weeks, the FBI worked to verify the information on Jordan's flash drive. They subpoenaed records from the banks in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. They began quietly contacting the investors listed in the files, interviewing them about their relationships with Professor Whitmore and their investments. They examined Whitmore's estate, which was being processed through probate in Florida. What they found confirmed everything Jordan had said. The offshore accounts existed and contained approximately $6.2 million in assets. 23 of the 38 investors on the list confirmed they'd given money to Professor Whitmore for investment opportunities that had never materialized. The estate inventory showed assets worth approximately $3.8 million beyond what Whitmore should have been able to accumulate on a professor's salary. The communications on the flash drive matched up with testimony from 2 of Whitmore's former associates, both of whom agreed to cooperate with the investigation in exchange for immunity deals. The fraud was real, extensive, and had been operating exactly as Jordan had described. But with Whitmore dead, there was nobody to prosecute. The FBI's investigation shifted focus to his co-conspirators and to the process of recovering assets for the victims. Jordan stayed with me during this period, essentially hiding in my apartment while the investigation progressed. He was paranoid about being seen in public, convinced that someone from Whitmore's network would recognize him. I took time off work to help him navigate the process of legally resurrecting himself. We hired an attorney, Patricia Moreno, who specialized in identity and estate law and had been practicing for 18 years. Patricia filed a petition with the court to have Jordan's death declaration reversed, a complex legal process that required extensive documentation and testimony. The hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks after our initial FBI meeting. In the meantime, the media got wind of the story. Someone, probably one of the investors who'd been interviewed, talked to a reporter. The headlines started appearing. Deceased professor allegedly ran $8 million investment fraud, and beloved educator's secret life as con artist exposed. The story went viral locally, then nationally. Professor Whitmore's reputation was destroyed posthumously. His family issued statements denying the allegations and defending his character. His former university launched an internal investigation. And Jordan's name started appearing in the coverage, first as an anonymous source, then as the research assistant who'd discovered the fraud and disappeared 8 years ago. That was when things got dangerous again. 3 days after Jordan's identity became public in connection with the fraud investigation, someone broke into my apartment building and tried to force open my door at 3:15 a.m. The building's security cameras caught footage of 2 men in dark clothing attempting to break the lock. I'd called 911 immediately, and they'd fled before police arrived, but the message was clear. Someone wanted Jordan silenced, even now, even with Whitmore dead and the investigation already underway. Agent Kovach assigned protective detail after that. 2 federal agents stationed outside my apartment building, watching for threats. Jordan wanted to run again. His instinct after 8 years was to disappear, to find safety in anonymity. But I convinced him to stay. We'd come too far. The evidence was secured, the investigation was progressing, and running now would accomplish nothing except letting the co-conspirators escape justice. The court hearing to reverse Jordan's death declaration happened on a Thursday morning. The courtroom was packed with media, curious onlookers, and several of Whitmore's fraud victims who wanted to see the person who'd exposed the scheme. Jordan testified about his disappearance, about finding the evidence, about 8 years in hiding. His parents were there, seeing their son alive for the first time in 8 years. His mother sobbed through the entire proceeding. The judge, Honorable Diane Nakamura, who'd been on the bench for 21 years, listened to all the testimony and reviewed the evidence. Then she made her ruling. "Mr. Reeves," she said, looking at Jordan directly, "what you did 8 years ago, running instead of going to proper authorities, caused immeasurable pain to your family and complicated what could have been a straightforward fraud investigation. However, given the credible threats to your life and the subsequent validation of your evidence, this court finds sufficient grounds to reverse the declaration of death. You are hereby legally alive again. Welcome back." The courtroom erupted. Jordan's parents pushed through the crowd to reach him, and I watched my best friend embrace his mother and father for the first time since he was 21 years old. It was cathartic and heartbreaking and beautiful all at once. The FBI's investigation concluded 2 months later. They'd identified 3 of Professor Whitmore's co-conspirators who'd helped recruit investors and create fraudulent documentation. All 3 were charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud and money laundering. The offshore accounts were frozen, and the assets were placed in receivership pending distribution to the victims. Whitmore's estate was successfully challenged in probate court, with victims filing claims against it for restitution. In total, approximately $9.6 million in assets were recovered and would be distributed to the 38 investors who'd been defrauded. It wasn't everything they'd lost, but it was something. The co-conspirators took plea deals rather than go to trial. They received sentences ranging from 18 months to 5 years in federal prison. The media coverage of the case was extensive. Jordan became a reluctant hero, the person who'd sacrificed 8 years of his life to protect evidence that ultimately brought justice to fraud victims. He hated the attention. He'd spent so long trying to be invisible that being thrust into the public eye felt like torture. But he did interviews, told his story, helped the victims understand what had happened to their money. Professor Whitmore's reputation was permanently destroyed. The university removed his name from an endowed scholarship. His published work was scrutinized, and several papers were retracted for data fabrication. His family struggled with the revelation that the man they'd known had been living a double life as a fraudster. Jordan went through intensive therapy to deal with the trauma of 8 years in hiding. His therapist, Dr. Yolanda Baptiste, who'd specialized in PTSD and complex trauma for 19 years, helped him process the paranoia, the isolation, and the guilt of what he'd put his family through. It was slow progress. Jordan had to relearn how to trust people, how to exist in one place without constantly looking over his shoulder, how to believe he was actually safe. He moved back in with his parents temporarily while he rebuilt his life. He had to get a new driver's license, new social security card, new everything since all his identification had expired or been canceled during his legal death. He finished his undergraduate degree through online courses, 8 years delayed but determined to complete what he'd started. He got a job at a nonprofit that helped fraud victims navigate restitution claims, using his experience to help others. His relationship with his parents was complicated. They were grateful he was alive but struggling to understand why he hadn't found a way to contact them in 8 years. Jordan tried to explain the fear, the certainty that contacting them would put them in danger, but it was hard for them to accept. They'd lost 8 years with their son because he'd been trying to protect them. The math didn't add up emotionally, even if it made logical sense. My friendship with Jordan slowly rebuilt itself, though it was different now. We'd both changed in 8 years. I wasn't the college kid he'd left behind, and he wasn't the optimistic 21-year-old who'd accidentally stumbled onto a fraud scheme. We had to relearn each other, figure out how to be friends again when so much had changed. We got coffee once a week and talked about small things, gradually working up to bigger conversations about what we'd both missed in each other's lives. It took nearly a year before things started to feel almost normal between us. The legal case against Whitmore's co-conspirators concluded 18 months after Jordan came back. The final restitution checks were distributed to the victims. Some recovered nearly everything they'd lost. Others received partial payments depending on how long they'd been invested in the scheme. Several of the victims reached out to Jordan personally to thank him for exposing the fraud and giving them a chance to recover their money. Those conversations were healing for him, validation that his 8 years in hiding hadn't been for nothing. 3 years after Jordan reappeared at my door, we went back to State University together for the first time since he'd disappeared. The campus had changed, new buildings and renovated spaces, but enough remained the same that it felt like walking through a memory. We stood outside the library where Jordan had last been seen 8 years earlier, where someone had tried to grab him in the parking lot and set him running. "You know what's strange?" Jordan said, looking at the building. "I spent 8 years thinking about this place, about this moment when everything fell apart. And now being here, it just looks like a library, just a normal building where normal students study." We walked across campus to the economics building where Professor Whitmore had once had his office. It was occupied by a different professor now, someone who'd never known Whitmore, who'd only heard the stories about the fraud and the research assistant who'd disappeared. The university had installed a plaque in the building lobby acknowledging the fraud victims and committing to higher ethical standards and oversight. It felt inadequate somehow, a small brass rectangle trying to memorialize something much larger and more complex. But it was something. Jordan had been legally alive again for 3 years when he met someone. A woman named Claire Ashford who worked at the nonprofit with him, who knew his whole story and didn't see him as broken or damaged or defined by what had happened. They started dating cautiously, Jordan still working through trust issues, and Claire patient enough to let him move at his own pace. I met her at a dinner Jordan organized, the first time he'd felt comfortable enough to introduce someone to his old life. She was kind and grounded, and exactly what he needed. They got engaged a year later. Jordan asked me to be his best man, the same role I would have had 8 years ago if his life hadn't been derailed. The wedding was small, mostly family and close friends. Jordan's parents were there, looking older but genuinely happy for the first time since their son had returned. Some of the fraud victims attended, people who'd become friends with Jordan during the restitution process. It was a celebration not just of Jordan and Claire, but of survival, of justice, of the possibility of building something new after everything had fallen apart. I gave a speech at the reception about friendship and resilience, and the strange ways life breaks us and puts us back together differently. I talked about the night Jordan showed up at my door, about believing him when his story sounded impossible, about choosing to help even when it meant risk. I said that real friendship meant showing up for each other even when 8 years and a fraud scheme and federal investigation stood between you. People cried, including Jordan. After the wedding, Jordan and Claire moved to Portland for a fresh start, away from all the places that carried memories of the fraud and the disappearance. Jordan got a graduate degree in forensic accounting and started working with the FBI as a consultant on fraud cases, using his experience to help identify and investigate investment schemes. He was good at it, able to spot patterns and red flags that others missed because he'd lived through the consequences of one scheme from the inside. He found purpose in the work, turning his trauma into expertise that protected others. 5 years after Jordan reappeared, the last of Whitmore's co-conspirators was released from federal prison after serving his full sentence. Jordan got a notification from the FBI Victim Services Office informing him of the release. He'd been nervous about it, worried that freed from prison, the co-conspirator might seek revenge for Jordan's testimony that had helped convict him. But nothing happened. The man moved to another state, got a job, and apparently wanted nothing more to do with anything connected to the fraud. The threat that had defined Jordan's life for 13 years, 8 in hiding and 5 in recovery, finally seemed to be truly over. I visited Jordan and Claire in Portland on the 7th anniversary of the night he'd shown up at my door. We had dinner at their house, a small place in a quiet neighborhood where Jordan had built a garden and Claire had set up a pottery studio. We talked about work and life and the normal problems of people in their mid-30s trying to figure out careers and mortgages and whether to have kids. At one point, Claire excused herself to take a phone call, and Jordan and I sat on their back porch watching the sunset. "Do you ever regret it?" Jordan asked suddenly. "Helping me? Getting involved in all of this?" I thought about it, about the stress and fear and complications that had come from believing Jordan and helping him expose the fraud. I thought about the threats, the investigation, the media attention, and then I thought about the alternative, turning Jordan away and letting him face everything alone. "Never," I said. "You're my best friend." That doesn't change because 8 years passed or because the situation was complicated. You would have done the same for me. Jordan nodded slowly. "I would have," he said. "I absolutely would have." We sat in comfortable silence while the sky darkened and lights came on in neighboring houses. After everything that had happened, all the running and hiding and exposure and justice, this moment felt like the real ending. Not the court cases or the convictions or the restitution, but this. Two friends sitting together, alive and safe and okay. If you made it this far, hit like, you've earned it.